Willow Blackwood fidgeted with her extra-large jacket for what felt like the 1,000th time that day, attempting to conceal her skinny build as much as she could. Barely topping 4'11", with a mass of untamed ginger hair and huge round spectacles dominating her small face, she had learned early on that blending in was her only chance at Northwood Academy. The sprawling sandstone building with its endless corridors and throngs of chattering students had become her own private nightmare for the past semester, ever since her family relocated from Montana. She gripped the straps of her well-worn satchel tightly as she moved through the bustling hallway, avoiding clusters of students who hardly seemed to notice she existed. The pale winter light filtered through the towering windows, casting faint shadows across the gleaming floors where her boots padded softly with each wary step. Her goal was always the same: the art studio, where she could lose herself among the easels and canvases and pretend the real world didn't intrude. "Well, look what slithered in." The voice sliced through the morning din like ice. Willow's heart lurched as she recognized the mocking tone of Zane Harrison, the self-proclaimed ruler of Northwood Academy. Towering at 6'3" with impeccably styled dark hair and the kind of self-assured attitude that came from never hearing the word no, Zane drew attention wherever he went. His designer coat draped across muscular shoulders, and his brown eyes held a malicious spark that made Willow's stomach twist. Beside him stood his devoted followers: Ricky Collins, a burly boy with a buzz cut and a perpetual sneer, and Marco Esposito, whose jet black hair was always carefully gelled and whose laughter sounded like nails scratching a chalkboard. Together, they formed a menacing barrier that blocked Willow's route to the art room. "Look, everyone, it's the little field mouse," Zane continued, his voice dripping with fake concern. "Still trying to vanish in that garbage bag you call a coat?" Willow's pulse raced in her ears as she tried to move around them, but Ricky shifted to block her path. Students began to slow down, sensing a confrontation, but none dared to intervene. This was Zane's territory, and everyone knew better than to cross him. "I'm just trying to get to class," Willow muttered, her voice barely audible over the surrounding noise. "What was that?" Zane cupped his ear dramatically. "I can't quite hear you over all that whispering. Maybe if you didn't dress like a street urchin, people might actually care what you have to say." Marco snickered, and Ricky cracked his knuckles. The sound made Willow wince, a reaction that only seemed to egg them on. What they didn't realize, what nobody at Northwood Academy knew, was that Willow had been practicing Aikido since she was 7 years old. Her mother, a former security guard, had insisted she learn to protect herself after a mugging in their old neighborhood. For years, she had trained 3 times a week, learning to use an opponent's force against them, to strike with speed and focused intention. But she couldn't use those skills. Not here, not against fellow students. Her mother had ingrained in her that martial arts were for true emergencies, not petty squabbles. "Self-defense is a last resort," she had told her countless times. "Avoid conflict when possible, fight only when necessary." So she endured. Day after day, week after week, she suppressed her pride and her training, telling herself it would pass, that they would get tired of it and pick on someone else. She was mistaken. The incidents increased gradually at first. Zane would accidentally knock her art supplies from her hands in the hallway, sending charcoal pencils rolling across the floor while students stepped over them without a second thought. Ricky would shove into her hard enough to send her crashing into lockers, the metallic echoes reverberating down the corridor. Marco would make cutting remarks about her appearance whenever she walked by, each word carefully crafted to maximize embarrassment. The lunchroom became a danger zone. Willow learned to time her arrival carefully, waiting until Zane and his posse were already seated before making her entrance. She would grab a salad and find an empty table in the far corner, hoping to eat in solitude. But solitude was a luxury she couldn't afford. "Hey, Mouse!" Zane's voice echoed across the lunchroom during lunch on a particularly bitter Thursday. "Why don't you come join us? We promise we won't bite hard." The entire lunchroom turned to stare as Willow froze, her fork poised over her salad. Heat flooded her face as dozens of eyes focused on her, waiting to see what would happen next. She could feel her hands trembling as she set down her food. "I'm okay here, thanks," she managed to say, her voice stronger than she felt. "Oh, but I insist." Zane stood up, his chair screeching against the floor. "Ricky, Marco, why don't you go escort our friend over here?" The two boys rose like trained attack dogs, their smiles predatory. Willow's muscles tensed, her body instinctively shifting into a defensive posture before she caught herself. She forced her shoulders to relax, her hands to unclench. She couldn't fight. Not here. Not now. As Ricky and Marco approached, she grabbed her satchel and hurried toward the exit, abandoning her untouched lunch behind. The sound of their laughter pursued her out of the lunchroom, ringing in her ears long after she'd retreated to the sanctuary of an empty music room. Mr. Abernathy, her music teacher, looked up from his sheet music with concern. "Willow, is everything all right, dear?" "I'm fine," Willow lied, settling into a piano bench near the window. "Just wanted to practice some scales before rehearsal." Mr. Abernathy studied her for a moment, his kind eyes seeing more than Willow wanted to reveal, but he simply nodded and returned to his work. It was the same response Willow received from all the teachers. They saw what was happening, but nobody wanted to get involved. It was easier to turn a blind eye, to pretend that teenage cruelty was just a normal part of growing up. The gymnasium was another battleground. During required physical education, Zane would accidentally hurl dodgeballs at her head, the rubber spheres colliding with painful smacks that left her head spinning. Coach Davis would blow his whistle and dismiss it as an accident, but the smirk on Zane's face told a different story. "My bad, Mouse," he would say with fake apology. "Guess you need to work on that coordination." If only he knew about her coordination. If only he knew that she could have caught that ball and hurled it back hard enough to knock him off his feet. But she gritted her teeth and rubbed her aching head, saving her anger for her practice dummy at home. The locker room was the worst. Away from the watchful eyes of instructors, Zane and his buddies felt free to intensify their torment. They would hide her uniform while she showered, forcing her to search frantically while wrapped in a towel. They would slam locker doors near her head, the metallic bangs making her jump. Once, they dumped her art portfolio with paint, destroying her drawings and sketches. Through it all, Willow remained silent. She cleaned up the messes, replaced her belongings, and tried to convince herself that ignoring them would make them lose interest. But bullies thrive on responses, and her obvious distress only fueled their hunger for more. The breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon in late January. Willow was heading to her locker after history class, her mind focused on the weekend ahead and the welcome two-day break from Zane's harassment. She was thinking about the new Aikido moves her sensei had demonstrated the night before, fluid techniques that demanded precise timing and balance. She didn't spot Zane and his crew waiting by her locker until it was too late. "There she is," Zane announced loudly, drawing the attention of nearby students. "The invisible girl herself." Willow approached warily, her key ready to quickly open her locker and grab her belongings. But as she reached for the lock, Ricky's hand lashed out and grabbed her arm. "Not so quick, Mouse," he sneered. "We want to have a little chat." "Let go of me," Willow said, trying to pull her arm free. But Ricky's grip was like a vice, his fingers digging into her skin. "You know what I think?" Zane stepped closer, his presence looming over her. "I think you're trying to hide something. Nobody's that much of a reject without a good reason." "Maybe she's got birthmarks under that jacket," Marco suggested with a cruel laugh. "Maybe that's why she covers up all the time." Zane's eyes lit up with malicious excitement. "Is that it, Mouse? Are you hiding something under there?" Before Willow could react, Zane's hand darted out and seized the front of her jacket. The fabric stretched and pulled as he yanked at it, trying to rip it open. Willow's hands flew to her chest, trying to hold it closed, but Zane was stronger and more determined. "Stop it!" she shouted, her voice breaking with panic and rage. "Leave me alone!" But Zane didn't stop. If anything, her distress seemed to encourage him. He pulled harder, the fabric straining against his grip. Students began to gather, forming a circle around the confrontation. Some pulled out their cell phones, ready to film whatever happened next. "Come on, Mouse," Zane taunted, his fingers twisted in her jacket. "What are you so afraid of showing us?" That's when Willow saw her. Olivia Sterling stood at the edge of the crowd, her green eyes wide with concern. Olivia was everything Willow wasn't. Confident, popular, stunning. Her long blonde hair cascaded in perfect waves around her shoulders, and her smile could melt glaciers. They had been partners in English class for the past few weeks, and Olivia had always been friendly to her, treating her like a human being instead of an annoyance to be ignored. "Zane, stop it," Olivia said, pushing through the crowd. "Leave her alone." Zane's grip on Willow's jacket loosened slightly as he turned to face Olivia. "Well, well, if it isn't the princess, this doesn't involve you, Olivia. It involves me when you're harassing someone who can't defend themselves," Olivia replied, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. Zane's expression darkened. "You know what, Olivia? Maybe you need to learn the same lesson as your little friend here." He released Willow's jacket and moved toward Olivia, his intentions clear. The crowd held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Olivia stood her ground, but Willow could see the fear in her eyes. And that's when something inside Willow shattered. Years of training, months of humiliation, and a lifetime of being told to avoid conflict suddenly meant nothing. Zane had crossed a line by threatening Olivia, and Willow wasn't going to let him hurt the only person who had shown her kindness. "Get away from her," Willow said, her voice carrying a dangerous edge that made Zane pause. He turned back to her with a laugh. "Oh, look! The mouse found her roar. What are you going to do about it, freak?" Zane lunged at Willow, his hand reaching for her jacket again, but this time she was ready. Everything slowed down as her training took over. She could see the path of his movement, the gaps in his defense, the perfect moment to strike. Her hand shot up and seized his wrist, her fingers finding the pressure point her sensei had taught her. Zane's eyes widened in surprise and pain as his grip went limp. Before he could react, Willow pivoted on her heel and used his own momentum against him, sending him stumbling backward. "What the hell?" Zane started to say, but Willow wasn't finished. She stepped forward, her small frame suddenly radiating confidence and power. "I said get away from her." Ricky and Marco moved to flank her, but Willow was already calculating angles and distances. When Ricky swung at her, she ducked under his arm and swept his leg, sending him crashing to the ground. Marco hesitated for a moment, clearly reconsidering his life choices, but Zane's angry shout spurred him into action. Marco charged at her like a bull, all muscle and no technique. Willow sidestepped at the last second and grabbed his outstretched arm, using his weight and momentum to flip him over her shoulder. He hit the ground hard, the wind knocked out of him. The crowd gasped, phones recording every moment. Zane stared at his fallen friends in disbelief before turning back to Willow with rage in his eyes. "You little freak," he snarled, drawing back his fist. "I'm going to destroy you." Zane's punch came fast and hard, but Willow had been expecting it. She leaned back, letting his fist whistle past her face, then grabbed his extended arm and twisted. Zane cried out in pain as Willow applied pressure to his elbow joint, forcing him to his knees. "You want to know what I'm hiding," Willow said, her voice calm and controlled despite the chaos around them. "I'm hiding the fact that I could have ended this months ago. I'm hiding the fact that I've been trained to defend myself, and I chose not to use that training because I thought you might eventually grow up." She applied more pressure, and Zane gasped in pain. "But you just made a mistake. You threatened someone I care about, and now I'm done playing nice." Zane tried to break free, but Willow's grip was unyielding. She had him completely at her mercy, and everyone in the hallway could see it. The great Zane Harrison, terror of Northwood Academy, was on his knees and helpless. "Please," Zane whimpered, his cocky facade crumbling. "Please, I'm sorry. I'll leave you alone." For a moment, Willow felt the urge to hurt him, to make him pay for every humiliation, every moment of fear, every tear she had shed because of his cruelty. She could feel the power surging through her, the knowledge that she could break his arm with a simple twist of her wrist. But she didn't. Instead, she looked down at him with something that might have been pity. "I'm not going to become like you," she said quietly. "But if you ever touch me or Olivia again, if you ever hurt someone who can't defend themselves, I won't be so merciful next time." She released him, and Zane scrambled backward, clutching his arm. Ricky and Marco were already pulling themselves to their feet, their faces flushed with embarrassment and pain. "Are you okay?" Olivia appeared at Willow's side, her eyes shining with admiration and concern. "I'm fine," Willow said, suddenly aware of all the eyes on her. The hallway was silent except for the sound of Zane and his friends retreating, their reputations in tatters. "That was amazing," Olivia whispered. "Where did you learn to do that?" "My mum taught me," Willow replied, her hands still shaking from the adrenaline. "She said I should only use it to protect myself or someone I care about." Olivia's smile was radiant. "Someone you care about." Willow felt her cheeks burn, but she nodded. "Yeah, someone I care about." The crowd began to disperse, students whispering excitedly about what they had witnessed. The story would spread through the school like wildfire, but for once, Willow didn't mind being the center of attention. In the days that followed, Northwood Academy felt like a different place. Zane and his friends gave Willow a wide berth, their eyes dropping to the floor whenever they passed her in the hallway. The casual cruelty that had once been their trademark was replaced by nervous glances and hushed conversations. Other students began to approach Willow with newfound respect. Some wanted to know about her training, others simply wanted to be associated with the girl who had taken down Zane Harrison. She found herself invited to sit at different lunch tables, included in conversations she had never been part of before. But the most meaningful change was her relationship with Olivia. What had started as English class chemistry had blossomed into something deeper. They spent their lunch breaks together, talking about everything from their favorite books to their dreams for the future. Olivia had a way of making Willow feel seen and valued, not just for her fighting skills, but for who she was as a person. "I always thought you were interesting," Olivia admitted one afternoon as they sat in the library, sharing a bag of pretzels. "But I didn't know how to approach you. You seemed so closed off." "I was protecting myself," Willow said, watching a group of students study at a nearby table. "I've been the new kid enough times to know that standing out usually means getting hurt. But you stood out anyway," Olivia pointed out, "just not in the way you expected." Willow smiled, thinking about how much her life had changed in such a short time. "My mom always said that sometimes you have to fight for what's right, even when you don't want to." A week after the confrontation, Willow was surprised to find Zane waiting by her locker after school. He looked smaller somehow, his shoulders slumped, and his usual arrogance replaced by nervous energy. "Can I talk to you?" he asked, his voice lacking its usual self-assurance. Willow studied him for a moment, her hand instinctively moving to her satchel strap. "What do you want, Zane?" "I wanted to apologize," he said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "What I did to you, what we did, it was wrong. I know that now." "You know that now?" Willow repeated, her voice skeptical. "You didn't know it was wrong when you were doing it." Zane's face flushed. I don't know what I thought. I guess I liked feeling powerful, and you were an easy target. But seeing you fight back, seeing how strong you really are, it made me realize how pathetic I was being." Apologizing doesn't undo weeks of torment, Willow said firmly. It doesn't erase the fear or the humiliation. I know, Zane nodded. I can't take back what I did, but I can promise it won't happen again, to you or anyone else. Willow considered his words, seeing something in his eyes that she hadn't seen before. Genuine regret. Actions speak louder than words, Zane. If you really want to make amends, prove it by being better. I will, he said earnestly. I promise. As Zane walked away, Willow felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The confrontation had changed more than just her status at school. It had changed her understanding of herself. She had learned that strength wasn't just about physical ability or fighting skills. It was about knowing when to fight and when to show mercy, when to stand up and when to step back. Olivia appeared at her side, having watched the exchange from a distance. How do you feel? She asked. Free, Willow replied, surprising herself with the honesty of the answer. For the first time in months, I feel free. They walked out of the school together, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the parking lot. Willow no longer felt the need to hide in oversized jackets or avoid eye contact with her classmates. She had found her voice, her strength, and something even more valuable. She had found someone who saw her for who she really was. The girl who had once been invisible was now impossible to ignore, not because she sought attention, but because she had learned to stand tall and face the world with confidence. Northwood Academy would never be the same, and neither would she. As they reached the street, Olivia slipped her hand into Willow's, their fingers intertwining naturally. Want to grab some tea? I know this cozy little place nearby. Willow smiled, feeling the warmth of Olivia's touch and the promise of whatever came next. I'd like that. The story of the quiet girl who fought back would become legend at Northwood Academy, passed down through generations of students who heard whispers in the hallways about the day everything changed. But for Willow, it wasn't about becoming a legend. It was about finding the courage to be herself, to protect what mattered, and to never let anyone make her feel small again. She had learned that sometimes the greatest victories come not from destroying your enemies, but from choosing mercy when you have the power to do harm. In sparing Zane when she could have hurt him, she had proven that strength and compassion could coexist, that standing up for yourself didn't require losing your humanity. The bullies had grabbed her shirt and shouted, expecting her to cower as she always had. Instead, she had shoved back against their cruelty and found something infinitely more valuable than revenge. She had found herself.